Hey everyone, welcome back. Here's the image as we left it off. Just needs some color, and we'll go ahead and get started on that today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a layer right on top of the background layer here. And that's just going to be a normal layer, and the colors are going to be underneath all the lines and everything. Now the lines aren't set to multiply yet, but they probably will be as I keep working on it, because they're going to look really light compared to all the color that's going to be inside of them. The way I color is actually pretty painfully simple. There aren't a lot of tricks and weirdness to it. It's just a matter of putting on some flats and then using a light brush to put on some highlights, and then, maybe a few other things, and then boom, you're done. So this is going to be a pretty simple exercise, and you can see how the ink lines are already lightening up under Charlie's dark color. Actually, she's not that dark, so let me color her up like that. And if I go up here to the ink layer, which is right there, I'll set that to multiply, and they'll immediately darken up, and the way they should. And what I'm going to do is just going to throw on the layer that's her primary fur color. And prior pictures have never really accented how light the fur of her belly and muzzle are, but I think I'm going to make sure I do that in this picture. It's kind of the color, sort of the color scheme of her father, although he looks more like kind of like a puma, and she's more house cat like. She doesn't have any tear marks or anything like that. Let's see. I opened up some questions on Fur Affinity, but I think a lot of people just don't read that many journals on Fur Affinity. A lot of people were like, "What? You're doing videos?" No. It's like, yeah, I wrote 2 journals about them, and but anyway, a lot of the questions people asked were just sort of standard fare. How'd you get started? How to blah 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 blah, and nothing really too, I don't know, engaging, I guess. When I was a kid, I was heavily into animals and things like that, because you're a kid, it's what you do, and that included dinosaurs because I was a boy. And unfortunately, this led to what normally happens when kids are into animals, and that was an indoctrination into environmentalism, which scared the hell out of me as a kid, because I was convinced that when I grew up and by the time I was an adult, the world would be a ruined husk. I mean, this was the things that I was just sort of being bombarded with as a child, from my teachers, who were very left of center, to the magazines, the Ranger Rick magazines, and all of the commercials with celebrities talking about deforestation and the rainforest going away, which I was convinced would be the case when I was an adult. And in fact, they told me that would happen, and it never did. So one of the things about having a little bit of age on you compared to your average college student is you sort of have seen all this stuff before play out. I was scared to death and perplexed at why my parents were so relaxed about the devastation that I'd be facing as an adult. And then I became an adult, and what do you know? The world was just fine, But I maintained my love for animals in general as just cute things, and then when I got heavily into science fiction, animals became this ready-made way to sort of explore and come up with alien species and different life forms and things like that. So, and I always grew up with cats, and my neighbors had dogs and stuff like that. So it was always around them in general. But I was never into furry as kind of a lifestyle, and certainly not a philosophy by any stretch. Like I've mentioned before in my creations, they're just these sorts of it's just a medium for me to work in. It's not really I wouldn't even say it's a preference. It's just something that I was just sort of fell into. But you could replace my characters with with the human characters, and the stories would still make sense. They'd still have the same kind of impact, I think. Let's see, where is okay. What I'm doing is I'm just sort of spreading on this color here, and wherever it bleeds over into another area that's going to have color, you can just kind of spill outside. The only place I'm not doing that is the grass in the background, because I'm just going to put that underneath them when I'm done with them totally. But this is just a flats phase. It's pretty mind-numbing. It's pretty boring. This is when you want to definitely have music playing, or even a little movie in the background or something, you know. Okay. Yeah, getting back onto the subject, I was amused by the things people were saying now about what they call climate change, what they used to call global warming, and I have a skeptical nature about it as well. Of course, it's a more complicated than do you think it's happening and what causes it and things like that. And it's never a I don't believe it's happening proposition, or it is happening or it's not happening, and that determines what side you're on. I've heard from scientists who believe that climates do change, and they just change on their own. And how much of that is changing on their own, and how much of that is man's contribution, we have to determine that. Do we really know for sure? I don't know. Secondly, how much of the change is, well, negative? I mean, if the Earth changes on its own, how much of it can we ascribe to our own behaviors, and how much of our own life should we regulate back into the Stone Age in order to try to change something that may very well change on its own anyway? But one thing I do know for certain is that all the predictions we were getting in the 90s have never come true. And I remember 1996, 1997, when you started having these really, really hot summers and very mild winters, And that was when the temperatures kind of peaked, 97, 98. And they've never really, now, and there were articles being written, and I'm not lying, about children being born in the 90s in London may grow up never having experienced snow for themselves. They may only know it as something that appears in a painting or on television and movies. And wow, weren't they full of shit? Because it never occurred to them now that we know that nothing is things didn't pan out that way. It's called something different now. It's called climate change, so that no matter what happens with the climate, if it gets warmer, if it gets colder, if you have record hurricanes, or if you have hardly any hurricanes or tornadoes, if you have a really light season, no matter what happens, an environmentalist can say, see, I was right. And that's not really science. That's just jive. But you should always be wary of scientists who marry their cause with a political agenda and who work on political money. So, let's see here. Anyway, and don't ever let people indoctrinate your kids if you ever have kids. Let kids make up their own mind, whether it's politics or religion. Let them sort of assess for themselves. Give them a good foundation. One of the good things that did come from my love of animals and as a kid was a healthy respect for the sciences, the developing a strong analytical mind, having a respect for information and human progress in the realm of technology and the understanding of the resources around us and the environment, things like that. Nobody wants dirty air, dirty water, So, my parents were amazingly very Christian people. I was talking to other people about how we seem to could have a spotlight on the worst that religions have to offer these days. And my parents were both Southern Christians. My mother was a Southern Baptist back before that was a bad thing. And my father, I don't know if he was a Baptist or not, but he was a Christian from Texas, and he worked a lot with ministries and things like that. And they, all this stuff about, opposing evolution and everything like that, that never came up. It was always just accepted that, there was science and then there was God, and God would do whatever he wants, and the natural sciences were still there for man to discover and speculate about. And they bought me all the science books I wanted to expand my brain. They never shied away from anything about natural history that I wanted to explore. They were never their religion, and the religion they raised me in never opposed science in any way. And what we're seeing now, I think, is, I don't know, it feels very new to me, because none of my friends were like this. None of the people who in the churches that we had to go to were like this at all. And I don't know where it comes from. I don't know why it's happening, but it just seems, I don't know if it's something that's always kind of been there in the little dirty nooks and crannies of the American landscape, and it's just now got a light thrown onto it by people who are looking for stuff to put on television and write books about, or if it's actually sort of this new resurgence of religious fundamentalism. But it's just a little weird. And I'm an atheist now, so it's all just kind of irrelevant to me anyway. To me, there are no more conflicts. Okay. Now, Charlie has a lighter area, and in the past it's been really kind of light, but now I'm going to make it sort of even more stark. And what I'm going to do is I've got this color here, which is lighter than her main color, and then I'm going to go in here and going to pick out the really soft, fuzzy airbrush, ramp it down to about 7%. And I'm going to use the magic wand tool to highlight her areas there. And really the only place, because of her clothing, the only places we're going to see that is going to be on her face and her neck. So I'm just going to leave it there, and then I'm going to just sort of do that in there. Now, oftentimes leaving it this kind of fuzzy, airbrushy shape is often enough. You can go in, if you want to make it more detailed, you can even go in and add little furry kind of brush strokes like that, although I found that most people don't even notice when you do that, and there's not much of a huge factor, a huge difference when you pull all the way out here. Most people don't even recognize it, but there's a little bit of it showing up there, so I'm going to leave that there. And then wherever you spilled over where it shouldn't be with your airbrush, you should erase it, like right here on the arm. Other than that, a lot of people just kind of asked me questions that didn't really make a lot of make good use of airtime. Of course, I only asked it like a couple hours before I went to work on this, and they're probably still piling up as we speak. A lot of starting out about, did I have any pet peeves, or do I have any particular characters that I like and dislike? What do I like drawing the most? And honestly, what I like drawing the most, I think she's got like a darker nose. What I'm doing is I'm going above in different layers as I add colors. And when you finish adding colors, you can even go in and flatten those layers out and consolidate your layers to make it easier to work with. So you don't end up with 50 million layers from all the different color patches that you're doing. And that's perfectly fine. Sometimes you may want to leave the lighter shade isolated because it's a fuzzy edge, not a sharp edge, that separates it from that color. But I never found that it really gets in my way too much. So I'm going to go ahead and just start highlighting these layers and then merging them to flatten them down. And then I'm going to go on to do her hair. Oops, looks like I missed a spot. There we go. Someone else asked me what I thought about transgendered characters or something like that, and I was like, well, obviously I have some, so I don't really. That's like asking me what do I think about people who are born with 6 toes on their foot. I don't really. I don't. It doesn't really factor into my assessment of them as a person. It's one of the things I've become over the years is just a total consummate individualist, where I realize that abstractions like group identities don't really exist and therefore shouldn't be factored. Like a sex, like men doesn't really exist, but individual men do. Women doesn't exist, but individual women do, and that's really all we should be assessing. You can make archetypes in your head, though. You know that people from different cultural backgrounds are likely to possibly behave a certain way, and that's important when it comes to characterization. Artists do it all the time, even though profiling is supposed to be a bad thing. We do carry it out sometimes, especially writers. It can be said, one of the gotcha questions is, if you were on a subway, and this was asked of Christopher Hitchens, and he remarked on it in his book, God is Not Great, where he was asked in a gotcha question if like 5 black men came onto the subway where he was writing, would he feel more or less safe? Would he be, worried? And he actually has had that experience before. The African American men were carrying toolboxes and wearing work gloves. He immediately felt safer and actually moved closer to sit near them because of it. And that was his answer to the question, and it was brilliant because it showed that your assessment about whether or not you were threatened had everything to do with the culture that someone was affecting. In this case, they were just working men, which you tend to equate work with honesty. These men obviously weren't out to intimidate people or engage in criminal activity, and so he was able to answer that pretty brilliantly and say, obviously, it's not about race; it's about the affectation of culture. And to say that if a bunch of white young men come onto the subway with their pants down around their ass and their hats on sideways, wearing it like they stole it, you might have the exact same apprehensions. Then you would say, okay, they're affecting a certain culture, and regardless of their race, regardless of the fact that if you took off all those stupid-looking clothes, they'd probably look, like my neighbors. They're affecting an attitude that is intending to be intimidating, and therefore you keep an extra eye on them. You see, I'm trying to get into the lines as much as possible because the lines are multiplying the color. And the problem is that when you do highlights and you go over these areas, there will be some bleed from when you select them and when you start highlighting them. And so you'll go in and you'll have to erase the edges on things, and it's all just a part of the touch-up process. I want to apologize for these videos being as long as they are. Some people just don't have the time to sit through them, and that's fine. But someone thought, hey, you can always speed them up, And I figure, well, I could do that, and that might look really neat, but you wouldn't, Some people also like hearing me talk about crap, and I can't really explain what I'm doing necessarily when I'm doing it if the video is zipping by really quickly. And a lot of people wanted to see the picture building over time, so yeah. And this is what I do when I'm not reading. I've been playing, I've been late to the Dragon Age train. I've been playing the first game again, or shouldn't say again. I started playing it twice on separate occasions in the past. Actually, that's a little light for her hair color, so I'm going to go a little brighter here. I was playing it on 2 separate occasions in the past, and whenever you do a flood fill like that to change a color, you always get some scraggly bleed. It's never as smooth as the brush lays it down, so I usually go in and sort of fix these little spillover areas. Probably not that big a deal when the picture is zoomed all the way out, but I'm a little OCD when it comes to this stuff here. Anyway, I started playing Dragon Age on consoles years ago, and both times I tried getting into it, I never got past the first maybe 3 or 4 missions before another game that I was looking forward to even more came along to drag me in. And I was never a super huge fan of fantasy. For some reason, it just all seemed so detached from reality that I had a hard time getting into it, and I was in love with, I think a lot of the Fallout games kept pulling me away from Dragon Age, even though it's got some neat characters and some neat stories, and I'm interested. I'm playing Dragon Age on PC now. I think like the definitive edition or whatever came out for like $7 on Steam a while ago, so I went ahead and just grabbed it. But I'm interested in the character dynamic, how you sort of get the approval of your party members and keep them satisfied. And I'm interested in how that plays out later on. Kind of like how, at least how in the Mass Effect series was supposed to be, where the decisions you made are actually supposed to affect the story, even though they rarely did. Okay. What I'm going to do is go in here and I'm going to use some color to darken her lashes. First I'm going to color in her eye. But I started really opening my eyes to fantasy worlds when, while I was in love with Fallout series, Elder Scrolls V Skyrim came out, and I was really starving for a computer game because I used to play all the first-person shooting games, and very rarely did they impress me. They would sometimes impress me for atmosphere, like the Metro 2033 game and Metro Last Light later on really did impress me for their setting and the feel they had to them. But for the most part, they were just boring. So I decided to give Skyrim a shot. I was okay. It's very much like the role-playing games that I got into with Fallout, and I was like, okay, let me give fantasy a try. And it hooked me. It hooked me a lot, and I loved the open world. I loved exploring, and it's one of those things that most video games never really accent as a feature. It's not a genre. It's usually just a feature in a game, exploration, that is. And I just wish more games really sort of slaked our thirst for that kind of thing. I was remarking once on Twitter the difference between, I didn't quite have enough characters to get my point across fully, but the difference between what Bethesda calls exploration and what a quote-unquote open-world Ubisoft game calls exploration. And I've played Assassin's Creed 4, I've played Far Cry 3, and like every single Ubisoft game I've ever played, I like it at first, it's fine, but after the next repetitive encounter or the next repetitive piece of crap, I just really get bored with it. Primarily because it just, Ubisoft's idea of exploration is you have to explore all this stuff so you can collect all the, go ahead, give me a new, So you can collect all of the collectibles or something, or here we want you to climb yet another goddamn tower in another goddamn city full of the same kind of goddamn people. And I was like, okay, it did get really fucking tedious. And in Far Cry 3, if you ran off and explored in one direction, you just found yet more douchebags and jeeps with machine guns. And I'm like, well, not really uncovering new things here. So, whereas in Bethesda, if you see a building on the horizon, or you see a settlement, or a cave, or a mountain, or something, you can go over there, and 9 times out of 10, you're going to run into a new little aspect of the universe they've built. You're going to run into a little bit of lore. You're going to peel away another layer of the world that seems like it's rich and it has history. And the worlds actually kind of feel like the people who are working in them actually enjoy what it is that they're doing. And they're really into these worlds that they've made. Okay. Charlie's a pretty simple scheme, and I think we're done with her. Flats. Just go on to her clothes now. Next, I'm going to go ahead and flatten all of her colors here. Merge them all together. Yeah, and so just the idea of being a character thrust into the world and being able to take it on, however it is you want to take it on, holds tremendous appeal for me. And I kind of only really get that sense, from Bethesda role-playing games, Bethesda open-world role-playing games. And lately I have been, when I'm not playing Dragon Age, I'll be dabbling in the Elder Scrolls Online, which is completely not like any other game in the Elder Scrolls series. It's, if you're like me, you like the open world, you like the exploration. That is not what the MMO provides at all. If you go exploring in one direction, you're going to run into things that are going to completely outlevel you, and they're going to just completely seal off effectively areas for you. It's like waking up in the New Vegas game and trying to run immediately to Vegas and running into a bunch of cazadors that are just going to, just gnaw on you and kill you. So, but Elder Scrolls Online, it's fine for an MMO, and there's some things about it I like. The main thing is it's fun to kind of build your character and make them what it is. The downside is that it's not an Elder Scrolls game, and I have a feeling that if you're a fan of Elder Scrolls, you're a fan because they are open world role-playing games, and you're a fan because you can build a character and run around and affect this world. There's a version of Elder Scrolls that exists on every single person's hard drive who has those games based on what their characters do. And the MMO does not feel like that at all. The world feels smaller, in no small part to the fact that you can only explore little pieces of it depending on your level, and the fact that it's often pretty crowded. And other people can ruin a game faster than any incompetent gaming company can do. Especially when you scroll over people's names and they have just completely dumb, lore-breaking names, because to them, games aren't about story and character. To them, games are just about fucking around. And I guess that's fine enough, but if you are actually interested in, getting involved in feeling like you're a part of someone's creation and really enjoying it, it can be really tedious to run into characters named, Captain Assmaster, or whatever it is that they do. It's another it's funny thing. And basically, you go on because you want to get your character to a new level. You want to experience new bits of stories. You want to find more lore books, which are kind of nice to read. And that was one of the things that impressed me about the Elder Scrolls universe, was the fact that you had these, unlike in Fallout, where you find a book and it either permanently, or in a case of a magazine, temporarily boosts your skill in one area, one thing. And it was a consumable item. In Elder Scrolls, you can collect these books and just build whole bookshelves in your homes and actually read them. And one of the greatest things was that I found was when I was heavily into Skyrim, in the midst of plunging 400 hours into a game, I discovered that someone had taken all of the Elder Scrolls books that were found in Skyrim. They took the game apart and they noticed that the books themselves were stored as simple text files in the game. And so they were able to publish them. And they published them as a free ebook for download. And the amount of information in these is just enormous, just huge. And every book in the Skyrim game, and I've got them on my phone now, and it shows up as one book in your library called the Books of Skyrim. And it's every book is a chapter in the big book of Skyrim, and you can click on a chapter and it'll take you right to it. You just hot link right to it. So, and they're all in alphabetical order, so you can just find everything. It's pretty cool. And I would read that for just, when I wasn't playing, I usually read something before bed, and I was reading that before bed. Okay, but yeah, the MMO, I can see myself probably getting tired of the MMO after maybe after a month or two, probably. Thing is, I'm so picky about games, I don't know what I'll play afterwards. Probably work on more Dragon Age. Even then, there's always a feeling of detachment when a game favors an isometric point of view to more of a first-person point of view, or even a close third-person point of view. Close third-person is kind of my favorite because I like to see the character move around. Isometric really detaches you from the world, and I don't know how much I dig that. I heard that a lot of the guys who made the original Fallout games are also making a fantasy world. They've got a whole Kickstarter and everything else, but it's an isometric world, and I don't know how interesting that's going to be to me, because it's more fun to explore, I think, when you're actually down at the level of the character exploring around than it is when you have like a god's eye view of everything and you're just kind of, hovering over the characters. They become less personable. Go ahead and flatten these. Okay. I also found it kind of, it kind of breaks the game sometimes in Elder Scrolls Online when you're in a public dungeon and you're at the end and this big boss rears his head and he's like, "Oh, you'll never defeat me," and then you turn around and 5 other guys are already wailing on him, and all you gotta do is kind of run up to him and stick your sword in there and get credit for the kill, and sort of detracts from how badass this guy is supposed to be when all these other people on the exact same quest are, taking care of business for you, So, and I saw some people at the town square of Daggerfall, I think it was, and their characters had taken off all their clothes, and they were using the play dead and the push-up emotes to simulate public sex in the middle of the. And you're like, okay, thanks for just being that person, and then you move on and sort of shake your head a little bit. And this is why MMOs will never be, at least to me. I understand the business reason why they want to make games like that, because it's just a ready source of continual budgetable income in a lot of ways, and a lot of people will hold on to their subscriptions even when they stop playing the game, whereas a single player game, you sell it once to the person And if you want to keep making money, you have to sell add-ons. And that's great, but I would rather than be making single-player games because they're more fun for me. And I want to hear more of what they got going on and what they got to say. And something really nice about being in a game like Skyrim and haggling your way through a dungeon on high difficulty and coming out of the other side and finding yourself at the top of a mountain range and looking out and seeing this gorgeous scenery. I tend to play on maximum graphic settings because my PC is really, really souped up. And you see this gorgeous gorgeous scenery. You see towns below you that you can walk to. You see rivers and forests, and you see mountains in the distance that you'll get to those mountains too. Everything's there you can walk to, and you have this tremendous sense of both majesty and solitude that when you're in an MMO, you may come out the other side of that dungeon and there's a guy next to you who's has a stupid character name and he's hopping like a retard, and it just completely pisses all over the experience and the neatness factor that you feel when you play a game like that. You feel the world feels so much smaller in an MMO than it does otherwise. And I do have this feeling that if you are an Elder Scrolls fan and you are playing Elder Scrolls Online, as much fun as you might be getting out of it, like I'm getting a decent amount of fun out of it. You would much rather be playing, a single player Elder Scrolls 6 or even Fallout 4, which definitely is the case for me. Really, it's just like a time kill now. Okay. You can kind of see how the colors will subdue the shadows. They won't seem as strong or as overwhelming, especially down here in the leg, like I said before, because the shading color I used is now blending in with the color flats that I'm laying on. I think Bethesda might have made their fans happier if they had kept expanding the Skyrim game with the engine that they built, and people could take their characters into new areas. I know they had some DLC. It was fine, but I actually expected a bit more. One person discovered that if you removed the travel restrictions, the geography restrictions in the game code, you could actually travel beyond, I think there's 2 gates, one that leads to Morrowind, another one that leads south to Cyrodiil. Is it Cyrodiil or Cryodiil? I can't remember. Anyway, and if you remove the code restrictions that say you can't journey, further than this, you actually begin to discover that they have the continent of Tamriel in the Skyrim game, the entire continent, and it's unresed, of course. There are no features. There are no forests, no towns, or anything like that. But the topography, the general topography, is there. It's all, it looks like Minecraft practically, but I mean, it's all there, and you can kind of go into Morrowind, and you can see where roughly there would be a volcano, the big mountain, and you can see the features and coastlines and stuff like that. And it seemed like it was ready for, if they wanted to, they could have simply kept expanding Skyrim as a game and offering modules where they would, expand the game into Morrowind, into Cyrodiil, into Hammerfell, and all these places if they wanted to, if they were interested. But instead, they just kind of closed the book on it, and I guess they put their eggs in the subscription basket, which I don't know how that's going to work in the long term. I think some people already kind of have the countdown to how long before Elder Scrolls goes free to play, which is what happens to A lot of stuff. I don't know if what the subscription status of WoW is, World of Warcraft, because I've never played World of Warcraft. I never really got into it, so I don't know. World of Warcraft never interested me. It was back when I was kind of shying away from all fantasy. And now I don't anymore. Now I actually kind of like it. You get kind of an orange that doesn't look completely silly for Victor here. No. And that'll do. But yeah, I'm kind of disappointed that there's been no announcement for Fallout 4. It's kind of hard to get me enthusiastic about a game. I'm very enthusiastic about Bethesda role-playing games simply because they are some of the few games that actually really grab my attention. There are some of the few games that have pulled me into their worlds and made me, want to spend hours and hours finding out what's over here, what's over there. And some of the few games that when I'm working, I'm thinking about, well, I'll be done with this by 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, and then I'll be able to, turn on my PC and start running around in that world. And it's some of the few games I can't wait to do that in. Even, Dragon Age is nice, and it has some decent character elements and choice elements, which I like, but overall, it doesn't feel like I'm exploring anything. It just feels like I'm deciding what battles to go to, what areas, what arenas to fast travel to, and then talk to people and level up my characters and stuff like that. And so, but I'll probably get Inquisition when it comes out in October. But because of my work, I can only devote my evenings to video games if I want to. I can do, maybe 3 or 4 hours a night after work. I got to make sure I get my work done. Otherwise, God. So I have to be picky about the video games I want to play. And I can't just, sit down I barely can even take days off. Even on my days off, I'm drawing things. Very rarely can I just take a day off and just spend 10 hours working on working on a video game for fun. That almost never gets to happen. Trying to think of some of the other questions people asked me. There wasn't much. It was just kind of okay. I kind of don't mind letting my work just speak for itself, and people just accept it for what it is. If someone asked me what do I like drawing the most, and honestly, I don't have a preference, I guess. I don't have a super opinion about it. I really like drawing pictures like this lately. That could change, the next month, but whatever. I like characterization pictures and fun pictures. I've kind of gotten burnt out for drawing adult pictures for pleasure. I do them as a job now, and I like them enough, but I'd much rather draw a nice character piece than an adult piece. Maybe it's just me getting old. Okay. one of the things I do have a peeve about drawing are really weird and unnatural characters. I did take commissions for a while, and I may go back to them, but I don't know if I will, because I get a lot of really weird characters and a lot of ideas that were just, I got some good ideas, but then I just got some ideas that just weren't that good. And when you get someone who wants to micromanage your comic page that they want you to draw, draw on this frame, have this happening from this camera angle, and on this frame, and then okay, this might be decent enough, but it might just drive me insane because I kind of like having that independence. But that's just a preference thing. But the unnatural characters really kind of drive me batty. The characters that are just loaded down with weird colors and accoutrements. I'm kind of old school. I remember back when everyone in the fandom was some kind of dog or cat or wild animal that you could actually recognize. And they weren't, half dragon or half shark or something. They didn't have, dolphin tails and stuff like that. And a lot of it just seems like people sort of, I like this, but I also like this, and then they just try to shove everything onto a character. And what I like about characters are how interesting they are as people. I don't think Trixie would be a more interesting character to me if she was green and had a barbell through her nose. In fact, I think I would look at her and kind of go, another one of them. I think I was explaining it on one picture where I had it was a Your Character Here auction, and some people were fighting over it, and one character was kind of a normal, ordinary character that was bidding, and another character was kind of a weird, crazy-looking character. And the picture I had drawn previously was a picture of a woman lifting her skirt to show that she wasn't wearing any underwear, but I would draw underwear if the person wanted to have underwear there. And it's kind of one of those things where it's a naughty, kind of a nice little, here's a naughty picture of a woman flirting aggressively and showing that she has a wild side and a little bit of a pervy side, and that's cute enough, And if it's a woman who looks like the kind of character you would see on the street walking, if she's looks like she's going to and from a job or to and from home running errands, she looks like anyone who could live in your neighborhood, aside from being furry. But if she looks like a normal person who wouldn't otherwise make you think anything weird, having that happen is like a special treat. It's like pulling aside a layer and glimpsing into her naughty little life, and as a regular person, when the skirt's down, she's got that normal camouflage of being an ordinary person, and the thrill is, whoa, she's not so normal in the head, and she's actually kind of exciting. And that on a normal character is really interesting. But if the character is an exotic dragon, a pink dragon with blue wings and bright blue horns and barbell piercings everywhere, she's kind of the design equivalent to a porn star, just trying to catch the eye, perfect tan, no tan line everywhere. If they're in an everyday sort of setting, it doesn't look right. When a porn star tries to pretend she's, a pirate or a housewife, it doesn't look right, and it completely clashes because normal housewives in your neighborhood don't have, they don't have sleeve tattoos, and they don't have perfect, no tan lined bodies, and they don't have nose jobs, and maybe in LA some of them do, but in everyday America, they don't look like that. They don't look like college co-eds. So it detracts. And if a pink dragon with bright blue horns and wings, and this gaudy stuff in her body comes up and flashes, then she's not, yeah, it may look nice and it may be a turn on, but there's no surprise factor to it. A character who looks like that is kind of doing what you expect a character who looks like that to do. It's kind of like, imagine the difference between, like, if you like, let's say, you like nuns, and you think that, oh, it's kind of naughty to imagine a nun giving in to some kind of temptation and becoming this lascivious, sexual woman. There's something neat about that, and I'll admit it. But when a woman dresses up in a nun costume, and the costume is made of shiny latex or PVC or whatever, and it's a short nun skirt that hugs the curve of her hips and ends just above her knees. Okay, she's dressed as a woman in a nun costume, but she doesn't come off anything like a nun, Whereas a nun who actually looks like she's wearing a real nun's habit, who it covers her figure, and she then proceeds to lift it or do something, give in to some kind of temptation or whatever. Then it has that authentic feel to it, even if it's not. I mean, it has that wow, that, oh my God, that's not expected, but it's totally hot, and kind of vibe to it that costumes just don't tend to put off. And that's kind of what you try to do if you're going to do adult comics, and you're going to do stuff that people will relate to. I don't know why I have that little nub there. I don't know what that's all about. If you're going to do stuff that you want people to relate to, and relatability, I think, is a big deal. I don't mean this is what happens to you on a daily basis, but I mean the kinds of scenes where people can look at them and go, yeah, I know how that likely feels, or I know what that character is going through, or I've been in, I've had similar kinds of experiences, if not those experiences, constantly, and you just don't get that from a lot of mainstream porn, which is just, a lot of it's about gonzo and things like that. And I guess maybe that's why I'm some kind of a weird ass. I don't like fake boobs that much. Well, I don't like them if I can tell. I've never been with a woman who had them fake, but just by looking, if I can tell they're probably fake, if I can tell they're augmented, it detracts a little bit for me. So I don't know how else to express that. I'd rather be with a woman who had an A cup than a woman who had fake ones, I guess. I don't know if I've ever colored Victor before, so I'm kind of making him up as I go. And let's go ahead and give him a darker nose. Let's make him even darker and a little bit more fleshy. Go ahead and flatten that, or merge those layers there. We'll give him kind of a bluish, maybe a dark blue shirt, or some kind of regular blue, ocean blue. I don't color coordinate. I think I talked about that before. I'm just not very good at it. And so a lot of, when I'm like, what color, whatever, is this character going to wear? I just sort of do a lot of trial and error, and like, I don't like the way those two colors come together, so we're going to just throw that away. I may just go with a really light, almost white color for him instead. And I can have fun throwing all kinds of grass stains and crap on it. There we go. Been wanting to get back to drawing more pictures like this in a long while. There was a huge stretch where I was doing a commissioned comic and also doing a lot of Your Character Here auctions because the commission was taking me so long. It had some really complicated characters in it, and there wasn't a day where I finished doing my regular work, which is comics for my catalog, and having to then immediately pivot right into doing a job that was already someone had already paid for, you know. So I couldn't really push it off too much. Now I'm actually at a point where I don't have anything that people have paid for waiting for me when I finish my regular work, so I have some spare time here to do images like this, little cute things that I've just wanted to do for fun, which we all need to do from time to time, I think. Doing work for yourself can be very gratifying. Especially because, not to sound like a snob, but I do get tired of other people's ideas sometimes. I mean, a lot of people have decent ideas, and I dig doing some of them, but they never inspire you quite as much as when they originate from your own head. But I am really fortunate, and I shouldn't say fortunate, I worked for it, but I'm kind of gratified that I have a style and a bunch of characters that people really seem to like, and they're willing to support me and continuing to do them. I would say to new artists starting out, you can look at how other people do stuff, and that can be a valuable tool, but it never hurts to get into the habit of drawing ideas from your own head, and just learning to produce them without any reference or assistance. It's a really easy way to start developing your own style, and a unique style is one of those things that it's real currency when it comes to building a bit of a fan base. People can try to mimic it, but they can never take it from you. You'll always have a monopoly on that ability. And I've had people, it gets brought to my attention a lot. So and so traced a picture of yours, or so and so heavily derived your style, and it doesn't upset me because they never fool anybody. It's a real obvious thing that it was derived. Oops, I forgot his fur right there. It's really obvious that it was derived, and you don't really have anything to worry about. And unlike, there's no, I wouldn't say it's competition like most products are in competition, like a smartphone. If you probably only have room for one smartphone in your individual life, so the advantages of Google and Apple are going to sell you on their particular business philosophies and their particular ups and downs on each other's products because they know that if you buy an Android phone, you're probably not going to buy an iPhone, and vice versa. Artists are different, one person can patronize as many artists as they feel like. If I really like Mu's work, there's nothing stopping me from also patronizing another artist like Bonk or Wolfie Nail or someone like that. There's nothing, there's nothing that says that because I patronize Mu's art from time to time, I can't, patronize Bonk's art from time to time. Even though people do have limited money, so they will allocate a certain amount probably for whether it's commissions or site subscriptions or supporting this artist or that artist or whatever in general. So I recognize that, but it's not a quantity sort of competition. It's not like toaster ovens. You're probably only going to have one in your house, and if you buy one, all other toaster manufacturers lose out on their chance for your business. Plus, every artist has a monopoly on their style, and that can be, you may like both. I know that, for instance, the style of someone like Kinkit, or actually she works as Blotch, in combination with Dark Tegan. Her style their style is completely and totally 100% different than the style of Mew or Wolfie Nail or something like that. And you have to decide. Some people like the super realistic look. Personally, I kind of don't. When I see a wolf head just sort of plopped onto an anthro body, I'm mindful of just how much space is left for the brain. The guy's going to have a brain the size of a wolf brain, and he's not going to be that bright, so that doesn't make any sense that he's walking around with clothes and phones and cars and things like that. So this is the kind of crap I think about when I see things like that, super realistic styles. And when I see super toony styles, they look really good, and I like those too, but at the same time, there are things about them I don't like, especially if you're drawing super toony adult comics. The toons really lose their relatability because it's so tuned and so stylized that it implies the anatomy that you may be familiar with on your own body and on your lover's body, as opposed to actually looking like it's a tangible body that you could actually reach out and know what it feels like and know what it's like to interact with it. That's why I think that styles like Wolfie Nail's style are some of the more popular styles, because they tend to combine the sort of the aesthetic and true anthropomorphic nature of a cartoon style in the face, the range of expression that you have, the aesthetic, or that particular aesthetic. They combine that with the tangibility of a more realistic, a bit of anatomy, despite the fact that his facial structure is very cartoony, and despite the fact that it's not a realistic kind of face like you would see a wildlife illustrator do. His bodies, they look relatable enough, even though they often look really athletic and fit. But I think it kind of combines the best of both worlds, I think, and I think they pull it off tremendously. People who do that tend to have, I think, my favorite styles anyway. Let's make that a little bit more there. We'll thicken that up a little bit. Oh, cats. Cats have the most difficult fur patterns sometimes, which is usually why I tend to draw them simplistically. Every now and then I'll complicate them by having a guy like this. But cat fur is so weird. It's unlike dog fur, a single strand of cat hair can have different colors on it, whereas a dog's fur, every single individual strand only has one color on it, which is probably why cats can easily develop way more complicated patterns than dogs in most cases. I like cats and I love dogs. So I never quite understood people who develop these overwhelming preferences for certain animals and then other animals become like an enemy. I never understood people who have this irrational hatred for one animal or another, especially like cats and stuff like that. Cat's just a cat, whatever. I never quite understood that. I've always had a level of empathy, and that's always carried over to animals and critters and things like that. So. Dogs I'm just more cautious with because they're bigger and untrained dogs can do damage inadvertently or intentionally if they're just crazy. I used to live with a Rottweiler who was just my ex-girlfriend wanted a Rottweiler despite my trying to nudge her in the cute corgi direction. She wanted to own a Rottweiler, so I was like, okay, fine. And I had another ex who I was on friendly terms with, and who she was like the female dog whisperer. She knew all this stuff about training and breeding, and she loved Rottweilers too, and she had several living in her house, and I asked her for advice, and it turned out she was breeding some, and if there was an extra male in the litter, she would allow my girlfriend to have it for a price. And the price was that she would pay professional rates for training and feeding and things like that. The training and feeding turned out to be several $1,000s worth. But I will say that if you have the means, it is definitely worth it. We got the more docile, easily worked with dog from the litter, and his name was Bishop, and he is a fucking joy, and he's just the best dog I've ever encountered, ever lived with for any length of time. He listened, he was affectionate, and he never jumped up. He wouldn't even mouth anybody. He was just this big, lovable dog. And he's... Oops, I think I need to... Those are going in the wrong direction. He's about the only thing I miss about living in Georgia. And I know dogs form really strong bonds with people. Cats do too. I noticed when I had a cat last year, my elderly cat died. But if I would go away for a weekend and come home, he was always very happy to see me, and he would kind of wait and see what room I would settle down in to get back to work or something before he would fall asleep, that kind of a thing. So, all right. Let's see. I think I'm gonna. Victor's kind of a work in progress as far as how he is, but what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to give him a lighter face, similar to his sister. And again, the only place you're going to see that is going to be on his face here. So let's just. And I'm doing this on a layer underneath where I put his striping, so that be sure to save every step, so that it wouldn't spill over and obscure those stripes. Now, what we're going to do is go ahead and flatten that again, or merge those color layers together. So I have all the colors on one layer, basically. You can do it however you want to. You can leave them all on separate layers if you want. I'm just in the habit of not doing that. But now we're going to do the highlights. And doing the highlights is incredibly simple. And again, like I said, my coloring process is just easy as hell. Many people will probably just be like, what? So I take the color dropper here, grab the color over here, make a lighter color here in the color selector. Then if you want, you can highlight her with the magic wand, the hair. go up to your shade layer, or your highlight layer, if you will, and I go to this brush here with the faded edges. And I ramp it down to about a flow of 2%. You can zoom in a little bit, although for a lot of areas you probably won't have to. And I just start to edge some of the areas where there's some light going in, and then where there's a lot of light, I kind of just lighten it up here. And you can get as detailed with it as you want, or as quick with it as you want. And I tend to be kind of quick when I'm just doing tunes. And for her hat, and what we'll do is, this is just a preliminary bit of putting on a highlight. What we'll eventually do is go in and do another layer where there's even lighter elements in certain areas. What I want to do someday is, when I have time to experiment some more, is kind of do a picture where I shroud the whole thing in what I would normally use as a shade color, and it just kind of makes everything dark, and it makes it look like the dominant color. And instead of highlighting, I go in and I use an eraser tool set to an airbrush mode on really low opacity, and I just go in and start lightening areas, and that'll be the highlighting function and the shading function, just to see how that turns out. I don't know how that'll turn out, but I want to do something like that. And I have done stuff like that before. I've had legs that were completely obscured by shadow, but I've still given them some depth, so they didn't look flat, by going in and sort of fading out. Whoops, looks like I'm picking up Victor's color there, so ramp down the tolerance to 10, and then I've only got her there. There we go. And yeah, like I said, it looks nice. So. This is kind of the way I've been doing it for a while. I used to do this with an airbrush, and the gradient was so smooth you could almost barely tell it was there. And sometimes you'll do it, and it'll be like, what? Is there a gradient there? I can't really tell. And you can tell once you drop out the shade layer, you can tell it's absent. And then when you put it back in, you can tell it's there. Our face is a lighter color, so I can go in there. And when you're doing areas like this, you can lighten it up, and you don't even have to use the magic wand tool. You can just kind of go in, and you know where light's going to be reflecting and where it's going to be dominant, and just sort of accent those areas with a lighter brush, or a lighter color, I should say. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to the rest of her clothing. You can, if you want, sometimes really get into finding ways to render the texture of clothing. I did one picture of Charlie where she's wearing her jeans, and I went into the texture of in the shading and then the highlighting and everything else. I went into like the sort of a cross stitch, sort of implying something of a something like a stitch pattern, for the thread and stuff like that, And you can even make sure you highlight some of the wrinkle effects there and the things that stand out, like the pocket. And when we add another layer, that'll be even more dramatic up there. But for this picture, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna do a stitch pattern. I looked back at that picture earlier when I wanted to verify what her colors were like, and I noticed it was a little overdone in the texture department. And I was just playing around with things, so you can see how she's starting to pop out, and it's starting to look like a nice finished character piece. Let's go ahead and do that heart. You can even experiment with things, and I've done this before in certain areas where instead of using the different colors and lightening them and then going in and highlighting the areas that need to be highlighted, I've actually used just a really kind of a faded white color and gone in with like a 1% airbrush and just done that on everything. I don't necessarily like the results of that quite as much, but it's okay. Now what I'm going to do with Victor is kind of a special thing. I'm going to go in here and lighten that up here, but I'm going to bleed into his striping, I think, because it will give it sort of more of a weird lighted effect. When you kind of stitch him in there, it's a little bit more difficult. There's not going to be much shading on his face, but still, you push that up to 32. Get in there in all these little areas here. But what that might do is give it a little bleed into see if that doesn't look okay. So it'll have the effect of highlighting. Well, that might be, I think that's probably too light. Let's darken that a little bit. But it'll have the effect of highlighting not just his regular fur, but his stripes at the same time. And if you want to and we can go in with another layer and add different stuff later, but I just wanted to get that out of the way. You can also go in and shade or do every individual stripe if you want as well. And I don't have to be super accurate with this because his arm is mostly under shade, and I'm only going to really highlight the top part here, so I'm going to do that. I'm getting a Charlie's tail again. Have to ramp it down to 10 and bite the bullet here. Try to get into all the little nooks and bits and things. Okay, I think that'll be fine for what we need to do. Go in there and kind of, it does look like I'm kind of oranging the striped bit out a bit in here. We're approaching a decent end to this, but we'll still have little details like, usually when I draw a picture like this, I'll put dirt and stuff in there because even cartoons should get dirty. I think they should get make it look like they're actually active and not just posing for a magazine article or something. Here we go. There, so his stripes have kind of faded a little bit, which is kind of what I wanted to do. And I'll still go in with a lighter color, even though his cheek is shrouded in shadow. I'll still go in and kind of try to accent it up a little bit with a little bit of a lighter shade here. Maybe the bridge of his nose. And then we'll move on to his clothing. It should be easy as pie. Someone said, try to never use stark white. It's like, well, you can tell yourself that, and I try not to think there are sacred rules in art. Sometimes white is good as just a way to accent a character background or something, but for the most part, you want to try to avoid plain white on actual objects. You may notice I tend to work towards the pastel end of the spectrum. I've been intensifying with my colors lately. It used to be a lot worse. It used to be really faded. And while that looked like a style scheme on my monitor, I tended to have pretty good monitors in my life. I noticed that other people's monitors tended to suck. And one person who pirated, I think it was the Red Riding Hood comics, he actually decided to quote-unquote color enhance the comic. And by color enhance, he meant make it look better on his really shitty washed-out monitor, because he made them super bright and almost stupid bright. And I don't think he was doing anyone, much less me, any favors, really. So, okay. Now I'm going to move on to the second. And this is almost optional if you feel the picture looks good enough as it is, but I kind of sometimes like to go in and just, add another little bit of lightness, especially around the edges of objects and seams and things like that. And I don't even really use the magic wand to isolate areas for this. I just kind of use a really small brush and just kind of control things by hand. But yeah, I've kind of gotten addicted to really good monitors now. My gaming PC is hooked up to my old, used to be my old workhorse, which was an old Apple 30-inch cinema display. Really good monitors. It's still good. The only thing that makes me kind of want to replace it with a more modern monitor is the fact that I'm sure it's just sucking all kinds of power. It's got a power brick that has to be plugged in. It's got all kinds of stuff that a normal monitor doesn't. But I am addicted to. Right now, I'm working on an iMac, one of the really thin ones, and it's just got a really gorgeous display. One of those displays, if you bought it separately, would be almost $1,000, and I'm kind of hooked on it. Can't really settle for workspaces that are less than 2560 by 1440 now. And so if I do replace that 30-inch monitor for my gaming PC, I'm going to have to probably end up paying at least over $500. Even then, it's going to have to be to the performance that I want. That's better than what I've got on there now, even with the power drain, because it's a really gorgeous monitor. And I've noticed this one of the reasons why some people are like, oh, I can't afford Apple products, they're really expensive. And it's like, I understand. One of the reasons why they're so expensive is they do tend to, I'm just sort of playing around with this football, see if I can apply some texture or some nubs on it. Probably not that important, but one of the reasons they are so expensive is that they do sort of pack them with high quality stuff. Like the monitors are really good monitors, and I've been really impressed with their touch screens and touch pads. They, for some reason, I've used like Sony laptops and other really expensive laptops, and for some reason, Apple's laptops tend to have the best touch screens. So they seem to be the most responsive and accurate and smooth and a pleasure to use. I don't know what it is, and I don't know why other manufacturers for so long had a hard time approaching it. But again, maybe I could explain why their stuff is so expensive. But if you want to play games, hey, you need that computer. And I know most people don't. You know, I have a Mac for work, and then I've got a PC that does nothing but play games. I don't even have an email client on it or anything. It just does games. You know, if I need any kind of key mailed to me, I'll just log into my email client through the web. And even then, I barely browse anything. Like, I'll go to sites that are like trusted sites where I know I can get mods for games. You know, my version of Skyrim is pretty heavily modded, and I really like a lot of the modding software people have come up with for those games. A lot of the interface options, you know, the updated interfaces are really, really handy. Not a huge fan of that foot, but I'm going to go ahead and just leave it. And I think this is practically a white highlight, so I think for her brother I can pretty much use the same one. This is a layer I don't always do, and it's a little bit more difficult to do around the head. I'm a little miffed that I have Windows 7 on my gaming PC, and I'm a little miffed that they're supposed to be discontinuing everything for it for next year. And that's going to be heartbreaking. I don't want to have to deal with installing Windows 8 on my machine, but I'm probably going to have to. As long as all my games work, I guess I'll be able to tolerate it, I guess. But I think that Microsoft tried to jump the gun by merging the look of their operating systems with their mobile operating systems with their gaming console operating system. I think they saw OS X including features from iOS into their system, and I think they tried to leapfrog them, and I don't think it was very good. There are a lot of things that are great, as in we can do them, but then there's like, should we? And I think people realized that with the old gorilla arm syndrome way back in the day. And if you're not familiar with what the gorilla arm syndrome was, and it was the idea that we can have touchscreen devices everywhere. They're great. We don't want to make computers as touchscreen devices because people maybe neat and novel at first, but people don't want to constantly elevate their hand and reach over to a monitor when it's a lot easier to use things that are on the surface of a desk. People ended up getting a tired arm and they got sick of it. And that's why I don't quite understand the touchscreen desktop today. I never quite got why, you know, Dell and HP were making those. I mean, I understand if you have something that fits on your lap, that makes sense, you know. But otherwise, what are you doing and why? Actually, let me start on her jeans next. One of the perils of doing multiple layers like this is you do run the risk of, if you overdo it, you might make her jeans look shiny instead of just merely highlighted, you know. And you kind of want to avoid that, so you kind of want to soften things a little. Here and go up here. You never want to forget that this is curled. It needs a little highlighting up there. And all right, you see where it's kind of, you kind of know how it's going to look when we're done. And we're almost done. I'll probably just throw on some quick grass. I've been trying to come up with different ways to do foliage, and what I really want to do is find a way to do sort of, yeah, some people call it cheating, or just quick ways to do stuff so that it looks like, quick ways to draw a bunch of leaves so it looks like a whole tree, quick ways to draw a bunch of bushes and shrubs so it looks like an entire hedgerow or an entire forest. And actually that's a little shiny, so I'm going to write that down a little bit. And find a way to cheat a cityscape so it looks like a bunch of buildings. And I'm always looking for new ways to do that. Okay, now we have an eyeball to do. And for eyeballs, what I tend to do is I tend not to like to use a lot of hard edges on an eyeball, even for the pupil. I just grab the color down until it appears almost black, and you can use a lighter color if you want. I take the little fuzzy airbrush brush, go all the way up to 100%. And because she's a cat, she's got a narrow slitty eye, but because she's running and playing and dodging, her eyeball, her pupil is really dilated, so you want to bring it out here. If you've ever had a cat about to pounce and play with you, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now I tend to put a big shadow above it because eyes cast shadows, and it gives the eye a little bit more depth when you do that. Now I'm going to go really light, and I'm going to go to another layer in case I mess up, and add sort of these little highlighting marks here. When you do this yourself, you can play around with it, and you can see where the magic wand tool left like a little bit of a line, and when you zoom out it probably won't be that big a deal, but I'll just go ahead and cover that up. Okay. So there we are. You can pretty much get a gist of how this is coming out. Now, for the, let's go ahead and go build a layer above everything, and that's going to have the wet glossy bit, and that's going to be her eye. And you can kind of do this by preference. You can do it as big or as small as you want. To imply anything you want to, you can do one, you can do a couple, you can make it look all big and weird and cute, or make it look small and more realistic, I guess. It's really up to you. I also tend to add a light ring on the hair, just because it's one of those things I just got into a long time ago, and bring it down to about a 3 pixel brush, and then just kind of brush it in, and then have it kind of form almost a ring, just to show that she's got nice, healthy, natural oils, and even other reflective surfaces like that. Probably not a big deal, but still, it's nice to do. So there we have our basic picture. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put another layer on top of all the colors, and I'm going to ramp it down to an opacity. Well, I'm going to leave it at 100% for now, but I'm going to set it to multiply. And I'm going to pick a sort of a dark grayish brown, and we're just going to add dirt to the characters and just make them look a little. Whoops, that's probably too dark here. And you can make these, even just by adding some spotty imperfections, you can, I'm going to go to a softer brush here, even just by adding spotty imperfections, you can imply that something isn't clean. That's one of the things that's good to do is, if you're drawing a scene like this, put a smudge on her face or something like that. Something on her shirt. Something to get her mom all pissed off about, And I've done this with technology, and it kind of, I'm still looking for different ways to do stuff, but I've noticed how other people do it sometimes. And saw one tech illustrator that I really admired, and he just sort of put specs on stuff. Just sort of one spec here and there would imply everything he needed to imply. But really, any kind of imperfection would work. I'm not the best at this, but just kind of, they do look like brush dabs, unfortunately. You see how that looks. Yeah, I'm gonna pull down the opacity a little bit so that it's not quite, and probably gonna do this from make her feet really dirty. Maybe even go in with a soft eraser and sort of make it not quite look so spotty. Just kind of imply that there's all kinds of crap on them and they're not clean. And just play around until it looks okay. Sometimes using a stroking instead of spotting may actually yield better results with this. So one of the problems with trying to do this is you end up sometimes, because humans are the way we are, we tend to want to make patterns, and you have to try to avoid making it look like you have this like even, distribution of things that should be technically random. So you want it to clump, and you want it to collect in places that would most likely get them, and not sort of look like leopard spots or something, So. And you can even go on to, I'm going to do another layer here, and I'm going to put a darker thing in there so I can have, it can kind of imply some real muddiness to it. And maybe even go in with a little bit of green into his shirt for a little bit. You can go in with green on his shirt if you want. Let me see what I can imply with a little bit of olive on multiply. Whoa! The hell kind of brush am I dealing with here? This isn't what I wanted. Stop it. Now, why in sweet Jesus is it doing that? Oh wait, I've got it set to dissolve instead of multiply. Like an idiot. So let's just put some green down here and some little bit of ramp that down a little bit so we don't just have some green where he slides on his ass, and shoulder where he's hitting stuff, and I have a feeling I'm gonna end up looking like a pattern here, so I'm gonna just fade that out right there. Maybe put some stains on her. Dirty up that heart. Dirty up the ball. Because this is not the NFL. Kids don't change their balls out. Okay. I think that'll do. Okay. All right, I think I'm ready to do the background, and it'll be a simple matter of, I'm just going to use the same color I used for that, and it'll just be a simple matter of going in underneath all the colors I did for the characters and drawing out the basic background template. Now, you may be doing like an entire background scene, and you can paint a whole forest if you feel like it, but what I want to do is not that. What I want to do is just have a patch, you know, just to imply what's going on. And what I'm going to do is, I probably don't need to be even doing this, but I want to constrain that edge right there. And wherever there's some shadow going in there, we're going to go ahead and get these pieces that are flying up. Let me zoom in and stop being a klutz. This is when you get towards the end of the image and you're like, all right, am I almost done? What else do I have to do? What else is there? Should I start rushing, or should I just still keep taking my time? You know. Anyway, you can see how amazingly, almost sophomoreically easy my little color thing is. All it is a matter of, you know, basically flats and highlights and stuff like that. But you know, nothing complicated at all, in the slightest, really. I'm sure there are ways to color that could be, you know, could blow my mind, and I've often thought about, God, what would it be like to just not have to work for months and just sit around doing all the stuff that I wanted to practice and try, and you know, just spend a whole day, you know, working on something that's completely experimental. Unfortunately, it's difficult when you have financial obligations and you have to work on what you know makes you money. So anyway, I'm adding as you can see, the grass texture here, just like I did the shading, you know, just kind of going through and just sort of implying a little bit of jaggedness here. And unfortunately, this is just all about, you know, it's one of those things, it's tedious, but if you don't do it, it kind of looks silly. Just as a big green blob, unless, you know, your style is just super simplistic. You know, you can even try just drawing a shape with the shape tool and just sort of blocking that whole thing off, and blocking that whole area off and doing a solid color. But the smooth edge of just a blob of shape would be incongruous, I think, with the texture of the shadow that it's encompassing. So let's do a little bit of this here, and have bits of grass coming out here. And we'll go in, just like we did with the highlight layers above, we'll go in and do other colors inside the grass and lighted areas and things like that as well. As soon as we get this edge looking the way we want it. And I kind of have that edge faded out. I should really go in there. Whoops. Not yet, eraser. We'll get to you in a minute. And if you want, you can even get more detailed and go in and draw like patches of ground that don't have grass, draw, you know, dirt and mud patches and things like that. You know, you can even do that if you want. That'd be nice, but I'm keeping this. I may do that for another picture someday, but right now I want to keep this simple, and I don't want this video to be like super long. I just want to show you the basics of how I construct a picture from beginning to end. And now that I am confident with some form of digital drawing, I'm able to do that. So you can see that's going to be the plane that they're on. And we'll go above that. We'll lighten that up and just kind of lay on. Whoops. I'm going to go back to my softer edged brush and go down to, ramp it down to like 2, and then go in and, well, that's really light. Let me ramp it up to about 6. One thing I noticed from transitioning to Photoshop CS3 to CS6 was the percentages for any kind of intensity or whatever in 3 were much lighter. When I used to do the shading edges for my tool, I would have it at 50% flow. When I moved to 6, I had to ramp it down to 20 to get the same sort of feel to it, And I'm not going to spend too much time on this grass. You can add bold areas where there's like lights reflecting off thicker stalks or whatever. You can, if you want, go in there and draw, little daisies and whatever. Butterflies will probably run away. Now what I want to do is kind of do broad strokes, so it looks like it's kind of faded out on just the light anyway. So it doesn't all look like a uniform color with just some stuff on it, Now, it looks pretty much done, but another thing that I often do is, actually I don't like that intensity of some of that secondary dirt, so I'm going to fade that down. By going into the layer, I'm going to take the opacity down to 50. That looks a lot better. But what I also sometimes do is go back to my lines. I'll do this with my pencils that I scan in and color like this, and I'll also do it with my digital inks. And there's the lines. You can see the lines drop out, and it almost looks like you could go in and sort of roughly put in lines on the edges and get almost like a painted picture if you wanted to. But the ink lines are here, and here's the ink lines put back. If there's an area where you want the line to be lighter, I'll go in with an eraser, set it to the fuzzy airbrush mode, go down to about 3, and just kind of slowly fade out some of these lines that are things like seams. You can even go to areas that are facing the light directly and lighten them up if it seems appropriate. Things like eyebrows you can lighten up on furries, things like that thing there. The edges of this football you can lighten up here. Hair, lines of hair, seams of, or wrinkles of clothes, seams of clothes. You can lighten this stuff up, and it will give areas you want to have a softer feel, more of a softer feel, instead of just like a hard black line that you can't escape, And it's also not a bad way to kind of, if you end up with really hard ink lines, you can sort of mitigate the some of the coloring book effect, where it looks like you have all this detail and depth inside this hard-edged outline that just stands out, to the viewer, which is not always a good thing. You can apply some of it to the grass. You can just kind of fade it out a little bit. this may be one of those things where if you don't do it and you post a picture, everyone's going to love it anyway. You know, it's going to be like, hey, whatever. But it adds almost a little imperceptible something to it. Do that seam right there. Especially if you're drawing, you know, close-ups of things and you want to add more detail and you want to emphasize what is more hard-edged, outlined, just like normally, versus what isn't. Okay. And now all that's left to do is add a signature, and I'm probably just going to go ahead and use the green color down here and go up to the top layer here and put it in a completely different layer. And I'll probably, you know, pick a good unintrusive place for it, like right here, you know, and just sort of. Actually, I think I need to draw it at 50%, and I've been signing off my. Actually, you mean I can be able to read that? Yeah, I guess you can. I've been signing off my all ages kind of stuff with that instead of putting the site URL in there, because the site URL is pretty much just for you know, adult material and stuff like that. And some of that looks kind of square down there. Let me get some of that in there. And you may do this where if you stare at your picture long enough, you'll find all kinds of stuff you want to do to it besides. But for the most part, you can, now that you have this, you can play around with different backgrounds if you want to, if you think it would look better with, like, instead of just having a stark white background, you can put in gray, you know, if you think that would look better. I'm going to leave it just white for the purposes of this here. And there we go. We are completely done with this. When I save it, right now it's at 600 dpi, I will flatten it, let the computer work with it better, and then drop it down to where it's a decent web viewing size. And you can play around with what you're comfortable with. If I save as a JPEG, I tend to save to the highest JPEG. I don't think people's modems in this day and age are really straining on that kind of stuff. So I don't really care if a picture is 300K or 400K or whatever. It doesn't really matter to me. So we are done, and I hope you liked it, and I may do more of this in the future. Bye-bye, everyone.